Quincy. Quick thank you for Pat for setting this up and Rice Creek for having me. I'm going to kind of run through just my own little field guide today, and a lot of the information is from what I have found when I have found it. The books are all great. I've got a really great variety over here. If anybody wants to take a peek anytime during or after, you're welcome to. But the best thing you can do is grab a book and then get out there and just start seeing stuff. And then once you do, it's more of a, what is this? Or maybe this isn't what I was looking for, and it's a nice little treasure hunt. So I started getting out in the woods. Oh my gosh, I think I was born out there. Grew up really sustainable. My family's always been farming, gardening, foraging, and I moved out west for about 8 years to Montana and started finding the elusive Morel, and that really kicked things off. And then, you know, there's berries and lots of other different plant medicine out there that you can find along the way if you're not finding what you want. But that's the joy of it, is just being outside in the woods for me, and seeing what there is and not necessarily looking for anything, and then you see a lot more. So I hope that after this, I can just kind of open your eyes a little bit, maybe get you to join a local mushroom group, book a hike with a guide, or just get some books and get out there and start seeing stuff and taking some wonderful photos. I have a lot of photos to run through. So if you want to ooh and ah, I am pretty proud of them. I get just as much joy out of seeing the mushrooms, even if I have no clue what there is. And that's the neat thing about it. Like, there's so much going on in the mushroom world that hardly anybody knows everything. And so it's a really humbling field to get into. Just be like, hey, I don't know, but I can teach you how to figure out what this is. So without further ado, quick gratitudes. This is my dog, Orpheus. I am a crazy dog owner. He is 170 pounds of big baby, and he goes out with me almost every time. If I leave him, there is some really pathetic and sad sounds when I leave my apartment. If I get my basket and he's not coming, I am in the doghouse. And then I also want to do a quick special shout out to my mom. She is my biggest supporter, and we both started getting into mushrooms in the same time when she was still in New York and I was in Montana. And so it was just really beautiful to have this passion for both of us start to flourish, and then to be able to share it. I will admit, I wasn't always, you know, in the best relationship with my mom. So to be able to do stuff like this and get out in nature and enjoy it with the people I love, that's the good stuff. And then another quick shout out to some other people that are really special to spend some time with in the woods. This is a good friend of mine, Russell Walker. We just nerd out. We go out in the woods and we nerd out about everything. Mushrooms, we sit there. Sometimes we take an hour just trying to get a good photo, wait for the shadows to go away. So he has seen a lot of me tripping in the woods. And I just want to say that I really mean that, like, I am tripping and falling. I'm actually not going to get into any of that into this talk. So disclaimer, if anybody needs to go out the door, I advocate for all plant medicines, but these are not the edible medicinal mushrooms that I'm talking about. I'm talking about the non-psychedelic gourmet culinary and adaptogenic mushrooms. So without further ado, I just want to start off and kind of give a quick background of what fungus is. So everybody talks about the mushroom. Mushroom is just the fruit. So what you see here, this cobweb, is the actual fungus. If you're outside and you kick over some leaves, or you see this kind of cobwebby structure, that is the actual mycelium, the actual fungus. It is everywhere. It's underneath our ground and our feet right now, under the ground, under concrete. It's in us. It's the oldest and largest living organism known. It is pretty spectacular, and there's some amazing uses for it. Our country is getting a little afraid of mushrooms, a little mycophobic, and I just want to be able to open people's eyes, because there's some really great ways to enjoy them, even if you're not consuming them and you're just out and enjoying the beauty. So this is a talk of mushrooms through the seasons, and for my first season, where I really start to come out of my shell, is springtime. Winter is great, but you don't always find as much in the winter, mushroom wise, but I'm always scouting and looking for good spots. So these are Scarlet Cups. They're also known as an elf cup, and they are an edible mushroom that I really enjoy more for just the beauty of them. I like to wrap them up in sushi wraps. And whenever I talk about eating a mushroom, I only mean after it's cooked. I'm never telling you to eat a raw mushroom. That's only going to set you up for upset stomach. So a lot of times when people eat a mushroom and they're like, well, I knew that this is what it was. I knew I was harvesting a Scarlet Cup. Well, if you didn't cook it, there's something in mushrooms called chitin, and it's really hard for our systems to break down until we have broken it with the heating process. So yes, we've all eaten a raw mushroom. I've eaten a raw button mushroom, but I really wouldn't suggest it. If you want to make sure that you are going to consume something and it's going to be good in your body, this is what we want to make sure we do. We're cooking everything.
Supermarket mushrooms?
Pardon?
Even supermarket mushrooms?
I would suggest it, yeah. And also with allergies, like you might be allergic to peanuts. I'm not. You might be allergic to a mushroom, and I'm not. So they always say to keep one for the doctor, where you're keeping a small chunk of whatever mushroom you're eating. And please don't expect to go out in the woods after this talk and be like, I know what I'm talking about, and I can go and I can identify this mushroom. Probably not going to happen from this talk alone.
What did you call the word that's the bad part of the mushroom?
Chitin?
Chitin.
C-H-I-T-I-N. Not necessarily bad, it's just what it's composed of that's hard for us to digest. So these are only in springtime, mid-March to early May is when I have found them. They really like lots of leaves. They're actually growing on the sticks themselves. So they're a saprobe, meaning that they're eating the sticks and decaying material. I found them in little damp spots all over mossiness. And if I find one on a log, I can kind of follow it down. And generally there's a really nice patch of them. Not all the time, but you know, why not look? You're already out there. There's a really neat function of cup mushrooms. So when we were talking about the mycelium being the actual fungus, and this is just the fruit, kind of think of it like an apple to a tree. This is the apple. And the spores is the seeds. So that's going to be the reproductive part. And we'll see actually how those are released here in just a second. Yeah, it's just a stunning color. I mean, when you're walking through the woods, that always is what catches my eye. And if this loads, cross our fingers, there will be a little mist that you will see once this mushroom's disturbed. Usually it's from wind or from rain dropping into the cup itself, and then it will release all of this little misted millions of spores. And it might just be the video quality where we're not seeing it, but if anybody wants to, I can pull it up on my phone afterwards and we can watch it do its thing. There it goes. You can see that. Yeah, sometimes, I mean, you can do it even when it's not harvested, and you can just walk up, kind of touch it, agitate it, or blow into it, and it will release those. Just kind of just a little neat party trick when you're out in the woods. Hey, check this out. So like I said, they like to grow kind of right near leaks. So in the springtime, usually I'm out looking for morels in the springtime, hiding away in the woods. And there's also just consolation prizes. If I'm not finding morels, I'm usually finding something. And with red cups, I'm able to go home with cups and leeks most of the time. Leeks or ramps. And then around the same time that I start to get out in the woods and see these Scarlet Cups, fiddleheads will start to pop out. And sometimes I'm just using the plants and the stage in their life as an indicator for when these mushrooms are going to come out. Morels like a warmer ground temperature of like 55 degrees, and you can get online and find any free access to some land maps. That's a really great way. But when I am seeing fiddleheads, if you look down in the bottom right part of this photo, I sometimes am also finding morels, which is a really, really nice day. When I was out west, it was a little easier with more burn sites to go and find them, but I have been able to find them here out east. And this is me harvesting my first morel ever. And it was such a sight, and here they are. So there's a couple different types of morels. You have your golden morels, your black morels, you have half-free morels, and then you have false morels. They usually come up the blacks first, and then the golden, and then the half freeze, but they all can be found in the same time period. Also only springtime. So if it's summer or fall and you're out looking for morels, sorry, it's not gonna never happen, but it's very unlikely.
Would you say that with the cooler weather that we've had thus far, except for this last little hot spell, that it's still possible?
It is possible. I mean, Mother Nature does whatever she wants, and we are all just at her whim. And if we don't have enough temperature, humidity, water, we're not going to have a good flourish. So that all comes into play. You can get into, I want to hike only on south-facing hills because it's going to warm up faster. So you can do small things like that. But in my own experience, we're past morel time.
Quincy, I have a question.
Sure.
So you said there was a false morel?
Yes, I do have a photo of it at the very end here. So when you're out and you start looking for things and you're thinking, hey, can I eat that? Which is a very common thing to ask, or I get asked. My initial answer to everything is no. The answer is no, and it's because of your safety and well-being. Like, I care about you, and I'm sure that we all have plenty of food in our freezer or some cans that we can make some hobo beans if we really needed to. Risk management comes into play a lot when you're out in the woods looking for things that you're going to put in your body. And also, if you want to take it home and share it with your friends and family, you really got to be sure you know what you're getting. So a little risk management involved. Healthy dose of caution has been given.
On that, pardon me, I'm on the edge of my seat to ask you. Have you ever had the bad experience with bad mushrooms?
I have not. The adage is there are old mushroom hunters and there are bold mushroom hunters, but there's not the two. You don't get an old, bold mushroom hunter. Yeah. So these actually are not morels, and we'll get into the false morel here in just a moment, and I can kind of talk more about.
Thank you, sorry.
No, you're good. Risk management, because there's some interesting thoughts on things you can eat and that you could do. So these actually are not morels. I just wanted to put these in here because these are queen bees. I was a beekeeper for quite some time when I first moved home, and that's all I could think of whenever we were breeding queens. And each one of these little sacs is a queen honeybee. And I was like, I love this even more because it looks like morels, and I'm finding morels when it's not morel season. And so all these little black spots that you see are little black morels coming up here. If I am harvesting a mushroom, I'm going to pick it in a different way than if I was trying to identify it. If I'm going to identify it, I'm going to collect the whole species. I'm going to get my hands dirty. I come out of the woods really dirty most of the times, because you want to know exactly what it is. What's it growing on? Is it soil? Is there wood under the soil? You really got to be able to get in touch with it. But when it comes to harvesting to eat, when you're harvesting an apple, you don't want to break the whole branch off. You just want to take the apple. So when I'm harvesting a mushroom, I want to leave the mycelium as undisturbed as possible, and I'm going to just cut with a knife right off at the base. Not too close to the ground, but give or take. And there's slugs is what I'm usually fighting for morels. And sometimes, you take a little less, take a little more, cut around where they've been eating. So they're tricky little buggers. You could walk all day. Actually, this photo, I walked for 3 hours in the woods, and I walked down the road back to my car, and those are right on the side of the road. I was very happy, but also like, you sly little things. So they look kind of like pine cones when you're out in the woods. On the left middle of the screen there. So I curse at pine cones a lot during morel season. But it is such a joy. I mean, to eat these, it's one of the largest cash producing businesses in the US. People get pretty protective over their morel spots, that's for sure. And I will be honest, I don't take a lot of hikes out in the spring because I'm usually just decompressing from the winter, trying to get back to myself. And this is just like big flourish into mushroom season for me. So sometimes I get a little selfish with my morel spots, I will admit.
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
We live and have shared garden spaces.
Mm-hmm.
Could we turn one into a morel?
You could. There's been a lot more success in growing them and cultivating them more recently. But what I do is I try and find a bunch of trees that they like, and I will take little bits of ones, or if I find some, I'll always leave a few mushrooms. I'm never trying to take more than I need. I want to make sure that we're going to have some for the years to come. But I'll take like things that I didn't eat or little cuttings, and I'll go and sprinkle them by some habitat that I think is right. So a lot of times when I'm out in the woods, I'm not just looking at the ground, I'm looking up, I'm looking at trees, I'm trying to identify those, because morels like to grow in unison with some trees. It's called a mycorrhizal relationship. And where I've found them the most here is at the base of dead or dying tree, apple trees, whether it's hawthorn, crabapple, like an old orchard, but then also elms, sycamores, ash are really great for them. So when you're looking for trees, it might not be in the springtime, you might be thinking, hey, this is good habitat. I'm gonna come back here in the spring. Yeah, I could just go for days with the morel photos. Sly little ones. This one actually, sometimes they don't like to do what they're told in the books. This one is growing right outside of a friend's porch. There wasn't none of the trees. Maybe there had been some trees in the past that were there, but sometimes they just do what they want, as does Mother Nature.
She could have brought compost.
Yes. So this is a half-free morel. When you slice them down the middle, and the knife's in here just to give kind of a size comparison, they are also hollow on the inside, but the actual cap of it, that little dark part on the lighter stem, it is free from the stem itself. So when you cut it open, you would be able to see. I don't have a photo of that because generally they go right from the woods and into my satchel, and then they go home and go into a pan with some butter. It doesn't take very long, but they are a wonderful one to dehydrate. A lot of people have said that their flavor just gets increased when you dehydrate them, and then you can have a really nice treat later in the year. So this is a false morel. So it looks similar to the morels. I'll backtrack a little bit here. Has that similar look at the cap, but instead of having a stem, it is all this weird brain looking structure. When you slice it open, it's not hollow. It's just all these teeny tiny little channels inside. This is where we're going to get back into that. Do I want to eat this? So this mushroom, if you think it's a morel and you cook it like a morel, is going to make you deathly sick. There are some people that think that it is edible, and I don't think that I need to try all of these crazy measures. Like this mushroom, when you cook it, if you decide to, I do not advocate for this, but I'll tell you how about it because it's kind of interesting. They say you should boil it without ingesting any of the fumes. Cover your mouth with a washcloth, open your windows, let your pets out of the house. You don't want to ingest any of the fumes that are coming off when you boil it. And you need to boil it and dump the water at least twice to just be sure. Because the fumes that you're not wanting to inhale is monomethylhydrazine, which is like the main component in jet fuel. So if I was in the woods and I had nothing to eat and I was starving and I had water and I could figure out how to boil this and there was nothing else, maybe I would try it. Honestly, I probably wouldn't even at that point. I would wait till the next day and walk somewhere else. But there's where that risk management thing comes in. I don't think that this is anything that you should mess around with.
I could find this here.
Yep, this one I found. I live in Ellicottville, just an hour south of Buffalo, so just in the Ellicottville area. But same thing, they come out in the same time of Morels, so they could be right there. It was on the same hillside that I found those leeks and some of the Scarlet Cups. So here are my best scouts. These are my chitlins, I call them. I know that term does not actually mean kids, but nieces and nephews is just a mouthful. And they are my best scouts, and we have the most fun going in the woods. And we're all pointing at this little pheasant back that is another consolation prize when you're out looking for morels. It's a great one to road hunt. And these are just what the pins are. So this is a very young form. When it's young, it's the older it gets, the chewier it gets. So the younger you can get it, the better texture it has. When you slice these, they smell like watermelon rind. It's absolutely bizarre. So it's like almost a nature scratch and sniff, or another party trick, if you will. Mother Nature's full of some surprises. So the pheasant backs get their name from that little design that's on the head. And I like to just slice them thin, toss them in some butter. I'm always a fan of anything the first time you're trying it. Toss it in a little butter, see what it tastes like by itself before you mix it up. And you can substitute mushrooms anywhere. You'll find some have crazy different flavors and textures. Some are so snotty that no matter how highly sought off they are, I think that I will find something else to eat if that's the texture. But to each their own. Yeah. Thanks, because I agree. I do. I get out there, I just swoon over these things. They're the best. Eggs is where I enjoy them the most, honestly. But you can, like I said, you can use them at any different spot. They are really great to be found on mossy dead logs and stumps and mixed hardwoods. And basically, if you're looking outside and you see a tree that's just lost all of its bark in the springtime, I'm usually stopping on the side of the road to see what's at the base of that tree, or sometimes all the way up it. And once they get a little bigger, you can kind of do a little pinch test where on the edges, if they're still soft, and then you pinch further back on the cap, just think like, this is getting chewier and chewier. Think about if you're harvesting it, is that the texture that I want? Do I want to be chewing on rubber? No. I don't personally. So I like to get the young little pins.
So they're saying this oyster.
Pardon?
Are they like family of oyster mushrooms?
They are not. They are a polypore. So on the underside, they have pores instead of like the button mushroom has gills. And they grow in a shelf style. So they're more in the family of like a turkey tail or a chicken of the woods mushroom, which we will see here in a little bit. So speaking of chicken of the woods, this one has fooled me, or it's not fooled me, it surprised me this year. It has shown itself to me the earliest I've ever seen it, which was just at the end of May. I can find this mushroom in 3 different seasons, spring, summer, and fall. It has the texture of chicken. It's a great party trick if you have somebody that is a little hesitant of eating mushrooms. I wouldn't say trick them and give them something that they don't know they're consuming, but maybe give the option of some chicken of the woods next to some actual chicken. I like to bread it, just like you would chicken. Do your flour and your egg and your breadcrumb, and then a lot of times I'll like par cook it and then freeze them. But you could do whatever you want with it from then. Roll it in hot sauce, barbecue, dip it in blue cheese. You can fool anybody that they're eating them. They're not eating them. This is the first chicken in the woods I ever found. It was very exciting for me. It was on a run, and it was one of these things where I ran past it and just that color caught my eye, and it was on a down log that I had to look back to see, and my run was over. I was basically skipping the rest of the way home. So these end here, so biking, and you see this large piece of orange. Just because you see it doesn't mean that it is in prime form to eat. You might find it a little later. I had someone 2 weeks ago bring me some chicken of the woods, and I was like, this is great. I didn't find this, but I'm happy that you brought this to me. This is wonderful. And I broke it open and there was maggots running all through it. So same thing, risk management. Do you want to eat the brown decaying steak at the store or the rotten apple? No, we want to make sure that we're looking at what we have. Not only have we found it, that we find it in the right time of its life, and hopefully it's not riddled with maggots. So same thing, biking, hiking, running, horseback riding, they're everywhere. And I found them most in black cherry woods. They like dead or dying black cherry. I've also found them on oak, beech, and maple. And there's this tree, the lowest one, is about 6 feet up. So if you go out in the woods and you have somebody and you can figure out what sticks I could attach to my knife and who could crawl up in that small little notch of that tree to cut some mushrooms, and the other person stands below it. Nobody got knocked out. There were mushrooms falling on people's heads. We managed. They were in great shape, but sometimes you get out there, you can see them and you can't get to them. Still just as much of a thrill, just as much of a thrill. They have a really yellow underside, and here's one that's really, really young. It still has that orange and yellow. Their Latin name is Latiparus sulphureus, which means that yellow coloring, but there's two different kinds of them, and one of them has a white underside, which is also edible. Chicken of the woods has been one of the mushrooms that I have known people to have a mild allergy to, which usually is like a itching of the lips. But just to be cautious, everybody's body digests things differently. So keep one for the doctor. They want to know exactly what you ate. So here's one when they're really young. When they're young like this and they haven't really branched out yet, this is when they're it's almost disturbing. It's like you're touching raw chicken, and you know, in your brain you're thinking, "Ooh, raw chicken. I don't need to have this on my hands." It's very fleshy, and you can do anything. So that if you can kind of tell in this photo of how fleshy it really is.
Quincey, are there lookalikes to that one?
There are not as many. There are plenty of orange mushrooms. But once you go, so you're going to be using all your senses when you're out in mushrooms. I'm going to be looking not just at the mushroom itself, I'm going to be looking at where it's growing, what it's growing in and on, what the top of it looks like, what the bottom of it looks like, what color, what smell. And then you can get into even further. At the end here, I have some photos of some spore prints, which is like even further down the line of making sure you know what you have. So this is the underside of a chicken of the woods, and it is so young that it looks super smooth. It actually has all of these thousands of tiny little pores or holes on the underside, and they become easier to see when it's older. But when it's young like this is a really great find.
Quincy, one more question.
Yeah.
So you say young, old, what are we talking lifespan? What's the growing?
So it all depends on all the elements. Our mushrooms need a food source. This one right here is eating into this log. They also need oxygen and they need water. So they're a lot kind of like us. In more ways, it's a little spooky than we want to admit. I mean, that mushroom that released its spores, that was an intuitive thought of the mushroom that it was being disturbed and it needed to reproduce. That was all on its own. Like I had just picked it up and it did its thing. But I apologize. I went off on a tangent and I do that. Lifespan. Thank you. Bringing me back. I've seen a chicken of the woods grow to max capacity in a week. And I've also seen it throughout probably 2 weeks where maybe not all of it is still edible because it's a little older. But once it gets very big and these florets fan out, sometimes you can do that pinch test like I was talking about, feel the edge of it. And as you feel back, it starts to get harder. You can just cut the edges of it. And that's nice too, because you're not taking the whole mushroom. It's not going to regrow where you cut it, but you're still leaving a bunch of surface area for it to reproduce when the spores fall from underneath it. And the colors, I mean, another one that I will say, be cautious. I will not be taking anybody's tickets for what I'm about to say, but I road hunt chicken in the woods a lot. It's just one that's really easy to spot. And when it's a big cache of it, it's really easy to catch your eye. Same thing, slugs. Slugs and bugs is the biggest thing. I mean, the more time you have in the woods, the better your chances of seeing some of these mushrooms, seeing any mushrooms. But your biggest competitor is bugs. So the one that's on the right here, you can see it still has that little bit of lighter color on the outside. It is still growing. But the one that is on the left, most of that lighter color is now underneath it, and it has reached its prime stage in life, and it is just going to start decomposing and dropping its spores. So you can still find chicken of the woods when it is past its prime. So here's some old chicken of the woods. Sometimes they'll still have a little bit of orange color, so I can scout them, and areas that I've seen them before, I'll go back to. Like if they haven't eaten all the nutrients out of that log, there is a good chance that they'll come back there in the next year. Not a guarantee, but worth a hike in the woods. So just some old photos. Once you start to recognize the trees and habitats, you'll be able to be like, oh, this used to be a chicken. I should come back here. So, and we transition from chickens to a chicken eating my basket of chanterelles. This was one of my most fruitful and memorable hauls of chanterelles. Was one of the first times that I had harvested them after I'd moved home. We had an incredible rain year. So we're coming up on chanterelles right now. They're mainly just late spring and into the summer. I have found them all the way as late as middle of August. Like last year, I was finding them way later than I had ever had before, and it's all just based on what temperature and rain we're given. So chanterelles do have, there's a few different species that show up at different times of the year, kind of like morels, but all kind of in the same time window. And there is a deadly lookalike, a couple that you really need to be aware of. So jack-o'-lantern mushroom, there's a photo at the end here. I've got a lot of those too. Is the biggest one that you're going to want to know what it is if you go out and you look for chanterelles. So as you can see here, they grow single or in small clusters, but always on the ground. Even the ones that are next to that log, they're growing out of the ground. Not ever will you find them on wood. So that's why when you're collecting something, you want to get the whole species, dig out around it, because the jack-o'-lanterns, at part of their life, they do look a lot like a chanterelle. I can see how people have picked them and had a really bad time when they tried to consume them. But if you're paying attention to what they're eating, you will only ever find chanterelles on the ground, and you will only ever find jack-o'-lanterns growing on wood.
Are they kind of in a formation where it looks like a fairy ring?
They can, yeah, and any mushroom can make a fairy ring. It's just basically like they're eating the nutrients inside of it. And I feel like a lot of times you can step into it and you're in this little portal, and next time you step out, you might be in a whole different time zone. Or you can think whatever you want, just as long as you're having fun in the woods, that's really all I care. So here's a few things that I always keep with me. When I'm out there, I've always got a knife. I have a few different carrying bags. This one is not a mesh bag, probably because I had filled it up with garbage. Half the times I come out of the woods with more garbage. Like Pat said when she saw me at the farmer's market, I had nothing to sell that week. I had only cans and bottles. And I did joke with somebody that was like, oh, are these vintage? I was like, yeah, $300, they're yours. Just joking around. But even if you're not coming out of the woods with things to eat, you can always do your part. And unfortunately, there's more garbage than you would like. So I usually keep a couple extra bags to haul out garbage, and then a few, either a basket or a bag with mesh, so that any spores that are still, if they are releasing, can be released as you walk. Having a brush is really nice, because the less dirt you can bring home, the more you can clean it off in the woods, the cleaner your kitchen is. And more time spent in the woods and not standing inside, because there's a lot of processing that goes into your mushrooms. If you get a heavy rain, a lot of times they're just covered with spackled mud and things. So some mushrooms do really well with being soaked, some do not, and that's kind of the trick of the trade. Like, there's a lot of little tips and tricks and uniqueness about each different species that you get to learn the more that you're out there. And if you don't have a bag, you can use your shirt or whatever you have with you, an extra pair of pants I've seen somebody use that have boxers underneath, and you just tie the bottoms of the pants and you hold it open. There's always a way to get mushrooms out. You can carry them in like this. But so the undersides of chanterelles, when you are trying to say, is this, it's poisonous looking like, is going to be a really good identifier other than what it's eating. So this is the chanterelle. It has more ridges than true gills, like the button mushroom and the portobello would have. And a jack-o'-lantern is going to have more of those true gills. Sometimes with different species of chanterelles, you're actually going to find them where they just look completely smooth on the underside. And sometimes they don't look like anything but a blob. So here's one of the ones that doesn't have as deep a grooves on the underside. And I found some really interesting chanterelles last year. As I was finding them later in the season, I was also finding them with these weird little anomalies where it would be like a mushroom growing on a mushroom, growing on a mushroom, or in really weird formations like so. Depending on how much water that you're getting, this guy here and the last one are very different in color. And how much hydration they have will affect that. But also I've had some people kind of put their nose up at the chanterelles at the market saying, oh, those look kind of dry. And then you go home and eat them and it still takes a little extra time to get all the moisture out. They can be just deceiving. Everybody's got a little different color and shape. As you can tell, I have a little too much fun sitting in the woods taking photos of mushrooms.
So in Oregon, we have a white chanterelle
Mhm.
and a beautiful golden.
And this is a golden right here. And I don't know if I've ever seen white chanterelles. I'm into it, and it makes me think I need to take a trip to Portland.
Yeah.
So here is a jack-o'-lantern. This is a deadly lookalike to a chanterelle, and I'm going to kind of toggle back and forth for a second. So jack-o'-lanterns are going to grow in a cluster. Chanterelles were a little intermittent on the ground. These are all going to grow from one central base and always off of wood. So at some points of their life, they do look like a chanterelle. So you just need to make sure that you know what you're looking for and the things that you don't want, because there is always a lookalike.
Let's see, are they tiny? Are they pretty tiny?
These are younger. These ones are younger, and then I've got a few photos here where they get a little bit bigger and they start to fan out. So this one right here really looks like a chanterelle to me.
Is that poison?
It is, yes. And there is edible, there's choice edible, there is poisonous, and there is deadly mushrooms. Your edible mushrooms, I think of them as like a survivalist thing. Nobody's going to harvest this mushroom for flavor or texture. But if I was in the woods and I had nothing to eat and I was starving, I could consume this after it was cooked. Choice edibles are going to be most of the ones I'm talking about today. Things that people are seeking. And these are all still just jack-o'-lanterns. They've got that bright orange. They have that kind of trumpet-like vase style. So you really want to make sure, because you're going to have a bad day if you do take some of those home. And then we have these teeny tiny little chanterelles. So this is a younger chanterelle, a smaller chanterelle that grows later in the year. And they always like to be found in little mossy, damp areas. These ones are yellowfoot chanterelles. You need a lot more of them to have a big meal. So sometimes that might be the reason that you didn't harvest them, is because there was only a few of them. And you can find some pretty good caches of these. A lot of the chanterelles, two of the same yellowfoot, but a different species. So like same family, different mom and dad kind of thing. Just down the tree a little bit. Chanterelles really like oaks. So when I am out in the woods, oak trees, I'm thinking, hey, summer, early fall, chanterelle spot for sure. So after, when we're starting to kind of transition into summer here, and we'll go from some edible mushrooms to some medicinal mushrooms. So this is a young reishi mushroom. Reishi mushrooms have been used in Chinese and Japanese medicine for thousands of years. It's all the medicinal mushrooms I'm talking about today are pretty big powerhouse mushrooms. Immune system booster. This one has been used to treat cancers. There is such a plethora of medicinal uses for reishi. I could spend probably an entire talk on it alone. Some people have consumed reishi where at this stage of its life, that white part of it, just the outer edge, is said to be edible after it's been cooked. But I usually like to wait until a little later and harvest them, and then I dehydrate them and I make them into a tincture form. So most of the ways that mushrooms I use medicinally, I'm making them into a tincture, dehydrating them, rehydrating them with a high grain alcohol. And then there's a few different steps you can take, different extraction methods. Underside here, we're just like the chicken of the woods, it's a poured mushroom and it grows like that shelf. They love hemlocks. I also love hemlocks. I don't know what it is. I just get really good vibes out of hemlock forests. But reishi love dead and dying hemlocks. I have seen them once on a black birch. And that was also pretty special because I have never seen in any book that says that reishi grow on black birch. So maybe I should have sent that off to Paul Stamens. And here's some reishi after it's past its prime. So even after it is harvestable, you can still scout good spots for it because like the chicken of the woods, there'll be some remnants. This was a mushroom that I did a little experiment with. I planted a bag of reishi in the ground and just was like, hey, let's see what happens. Life's an experiment. Just got to make sure you're writing it down. So the spores on the reishi are a little different than the rest of the mushrooms that usually drop from the underside. You can see kind of a little bit of brown dusting on the top of some of these older specimen. And that is the actual spores. The other common name is a varnish self, just for that kind of lacquer finish that they have. And I mean, any time of year you would think that they would lose their color, and you can find them, I mean, even in the winter. And so you can really see the spores on this one kind of on the bottom left-hand side there, the corner of the mushroom itself, where there's some brown dust collecting. Then the wind will blow that off. This was one of the largest caches of reishi I'd ever found. They were older, past their time of harvesting, but just a delight to see. And the same thing, it's like, I could not reach any of these if I thought, I mean, I was standing at the base of the tree. The first ones were probably 12 feet up. Again, with my dog, she was gonna show up. I couldn't bring him today, so I had to bring him in spirit. So after we start seeing reishi, I start to think black trumpets. They're in the chanterelle family. Just like chanterelles, they have a really sweet aroma and flavor. I love to eat all of the mushrooms with eggs. I do, but these ones are really great. I've even had people make them in desserts. I have not tried that myself, but the desserts were fantastic. If you want to make some black trumpet desserts and bring them my way, I heard that someone in the audience here has some from last year. So a great way to store them and have a nice little treat later in the year is dehydrate them. They are very small. They are very small. And I use this plant as an indicator for where they are going to flourish. This is an American bear cone. It looks like a pine cone or a little pine tree growing out of the ground, but it's a parasitic plant, grows similar to mushrooms where it doesn't need chlorophyll to grow. And it is only taking from oak trees and roots specifically. So wherever I find these, I usually find a really big cache of black trumpets. So something that I'm looking for, even if it's not the mushroom itself or tree identification, but using some plants along the way too. And this is a very nice little patch of black trumpets. They get their name from that very obvious little fluke that they have there. And they blend in with the leaves. They are really hard to find. Lots of times I have been walking on them, and that's how I found them, because I was like, this is some floral, it's very apricot-like. And then you stop with my big dog, I'm like, stay. Big dog, big feet, little mushrooms, not always a good idea. Not always a good idea. But they are just a joy. Once you find them, they can be really dark. I've seen them really gray, very brown, a whole array of colors, but the flavor is just incomparable. Gosh, thanks for letting me show these photos with you. You could just see them myself. I'm getting all jazzed up. That's a really good one there. So these two, they like the oak trees, so that gives them that mycorrhizal relationship. They're growing right out of the ground. So even though this one, and you've seen a few, they're right next to wood, they're actually growing from the ground in the soil itself. So we have a duo going on. They're very similar color. But the next mushroom that I start to see throughout the seasons is this old man of the woods. And you always like to find old men in the woods, and now you can, you know, and even if you don't want to, you can maybe find the kind that you do want to find. These ones taste the texture just like steak. It's really bizarre. And they bleed. So this one on the far right, the dark mushroom, see here too, one old man of the woods and two different mushrooms. You want to make sure you know what you're getting, because sometimes they can grow right next to others. And yes, these three mushrooms all look very different, but there have been mistakes made before. So
Quincy, if you're harvesting something that's near something that's not good, is that dangerous or not?
only if you're mixing them into your bag.
Okay, so they
Mhm.
remain
Yep.
very separate.
Anything that I'm taking out of the woods to consume versus identify, I'm keeping them in separate containers. So the old man of the woods, it bleeds, quote unquote. When you slice it, it is white, and you will watch it slowly fade to this burgundy blood red color. If you like steak and you want to try a mushroom that is the closest texture to steak that I've ever found, it's wild. Anywhere that you can do steak, you can sub this mushroom. Steak tacos, just as a steak on top of salads, always cooked. And I usually just like a good steak, even though I'm not a huge meat eater. When I do have some, I just like it in butter. It's got southern roots in me. Once they're past their prime, they get really dark on the underside. So when you harvest them, I think I have another photo here. They're really furry, but you want the underside of them to be kind of white. And these ones got banged up in my bag a little bit. But you can kind of see that there's some light color underneath there. And same thing, if you flip a mushroom over, you cut it open, there's bugs or something in there. I guess you could soak them out with salt, but that's your choice. Maybe just say, hey, I found this, that's great. Now I can find another one that's in better shape to be consumed. These grow on the ground or on wood. They like oak, beech, and pine. And it is always nice and just a nice little chuckle to tell somebody that doesn't know what you're talking about. If you're like, see that old man in the woods over there? They'll start looking around and not have any clue what you're talking about. So this next mushroom is a choice edible that is a little tricky. It's called a lobster mushroom. I have found them in Maine, and I've also found them here, but when I was in Maine, I was like, hey, finding lobsters in the woods in Maine, this is perfect. They are a parasitic mushroom. So this is actually a fungus that takes over another mushroom that after it has completely parasitized that initial mushroom is now a lobster and is a choice edible mushroom. But before that is not necessarily a mushroom that you can eat. So a little funky. Mushrooms are wacky. But basically there's two different kinds, a russula and a lactarius mushroom. They both have gills, and once this mushroom is completely taken over, it will look like there's no gills at all. Like it just smooths it all out. And this one's been eaten by bugs. I will admit I still ate this one because they're just, they taste just like lobster meat. Again, just a little butter, maybe some garlic. I don't put these with anything. I just enjoy them by themselves. Yeah, so there's that kind of weird underside where it used to have gills. I mean, it used to be a cap and stem, your basic mushroom, and it's just been taken over by a different fungus and rendering it into this choice edible. I found them in a mixed hardwoods. I've also found them like right on the edge of pines where the pines and the hardwoods meet. Latest in the year I found them is mid-September. And the earliest I've ever found them is at the end of July. So just a summer mushroom. So there are a lot, like if people contact me and they say, I really want to find this mushroom. I don't offer a guaranteed foragery hike because I can't even facilitate that for myself. I mean, I wish, but I also just enjoy going out and seeing stuff, and I try and cater it to getting people interested, teaching them how to identify. But if I know you're looking for a certain mushroom, I usually bring things that I've harvested or things that I have grown just as an offering when we're done in case we don't find anything, but I like to take people to a spot. If you call me and you wanna find chanterelles, I'm gonna tell you, hey, we should go within these weeks. So I'll do my best, but I just can't guarantee it because I can't even do that for myself. So now we're gonna get into puffballs. They are starting to come into the fall, so summer and fall, and there's a couple different kinds. Any of the ones that are edible, if you don't like the texture of tofu, you're probably not gonna like puffballs. Whenever you cut them open to tell if they are good time to eat. They need to be completely white, no yellowing, and they need to be firm. If they're starting to get soft, gooey, or any yellow, they're starting to decompose. And we don't want to put decomposing food into our bodies. So let's avoid that. They grow in nice little clusters. They eat the logs. They're little great decomposers. And these ones are the pear-shaped. They don't grow very big. They're just small little guys, so you do have to get quite a few of them, and you have to beat the slugs. But you can see on the inside that this is a really great one because it's really white and it was firm. I was like, I see you. Enjoy your meal. So then we have some gem studded puffballs. They start coming up the same time, but a little after the pear-shaped. And I've seen them all the way from middle August to early September, and they grow on the ground or on wood, and they can be by themselves. There can be some friends. There's one little spot on the right-hand side of these photos that's a really young one that was starting to grow. And we do have a fun lookalike to talk about that I will show you at the end, which is another fun nature party trick, but something you need to look out for. After the puffballs have reached their maturity and they go through that yellowing and the goo stage on the inside, they dry out. And then if you've ever seen them, you can walk through the woods and go or step on them and they will emit their spores. You really don't want to inhale those spores. I've done it on accident, but you don't really want to just huff any of those old spores. Let them release into nature and do their thing. You have enough fungus inside your body already. But they can have just great, it looked just like a golf ball. And I have walked in the woods and been like, mushrooms, I don't know, better check it out. So then we get into what maybe some of you have seen as the giant puffballs. They grow meadows, lawns, grassy areas. This one was tucked back. I was harvesting apples for our annual family apple pressing, and just randomly came on some really nice, they were past their prime, but they can get very big. I've seen them as big as volleyballs. Didn't have the best size comparison here, but there was a nice little catch of them. I have really enjoyed these like tofu if you want to add them to your eggs or substitute them for your eggs. Like if you have somebody that's at your house that isn't a vegan, it's a really great way to have some breakfast for them. Or tofu scramblers anytime, stir fries. But with the bigger ones, they get pretty big. And I know I don't have a big head, but just for a little size comparison. I have had these big ones sliced in diameter and used as pizza crust. Like instead of, they don't really crisp up as well as I would like. I tried different ways of par cooking in them and then putting the stuff on and baking them again, but they're still nice and soft. So I actually went with using them like the cheese instead on top, which was really nice. You just play around with it. They're so versatile once you start consuming them. So looks like a puffball, right? You cut it open. This is not a puffball. If you ever find and this is why you need to cut them all open, make sure that they're still good and firm and not decaying. If you find this, you have found an Amanita. And Amanitas, like the emoji mushroom, the red with the white patches, they are a deadly mushroom. So with poisonous mushrooms, you're gonna know, or an undercooked mushroom, within a half an hour to maybe an hour that you ate something you shouldn't have, maybe didn't cook it as much. Usually it's just gonna be some GI upset one way or the other. You might think you need to go to the doctor. It'll probably pass. I really hope it does if that ever happens to you. Amanitas are a deadly mushroom. So anywhere from like a day to 3 days later, that's when you find out and it's too late. An Amanita has amatoxin in them, and trace drops of it in your system will shut down your kidneys and your liver. Some Amanitas people have decided they want to consume. Some of them want to use them for psychedelic properties, and that's great, but I care about you guys, so please don't. It's not worth it. It's not worth it in my mind. But it's kind of neat to still see it in this form. And I do have a photo here of what the Amanita itself looks like once it has emerged out of that egg. This is the Caesar's mushroom, the Amanita jacksonii. Really stunning colors, but something you do not want to consume. Here, I thought I was going to be nosing my notes, and I'm not even on the right page.
Is that design you see inside that, the one you just showed previously? Would that show up in that other mushroom as well? Is that always there, that design?
If you find this and you're looking for puffballs, this is not a puffball.
Right.
So that's what you want to know. But inside of the egg, before it has emerged,
Oh, yeah.
yep, it's just that mushroom forming inside there. And then like the Amanita mushroom, the emoji mushroom itself, those little white patches on the top are the parts of the egg as it has emerged out, left on its head.
And that's still gonna be not something, not good.
No, it's beautiful. You'll see them out there and you're gonna fawn over it, but it's not something that you ever want to even think about consuming. So then we get back into my favorites, into some hemlock forests, and we'll find hedgehogs. The chanterelles and black trumpets are very sweet. These are, I dare say, almost sweeter. They, on the underside of their cap, have teeth, which you can kind of see on the one side of this photo here. And that's where the spores come down. So it's a toothed mushroom. Same thing, I don't mix these with anything. They have such a great flavor on their own. That's all I want. But you can do them however you would like. They really like the month of September. I have never found them outside of the month of September, personally. And all of that plays into, too, the time that you have to be in the woods. So, you know, if you have an hour a week to get into the woods, that's better than none. But you might not find as much as if you had 10 hours a week or an hour a day. So just be easy with yourself and know your time and kind of take that into account when you're out there. So there's a better picture of the tooth on the underside there. And these ones can get pretty large. I have picked, I had a bag of 6 of them, and I had over 3 pounds of mushrooms just with 6 of these on their own. And so this is a big part, is cleaning them. So if you find a lot of mushrooms, you need to be prepared to sit down and either do this in the woods or take them home and clean them up afterwards. But this was one of my most memorable caches of hedgehogs, along with my mom, she's a great foraging partner. We just nerd out. And when we walk too far away from each other, she's an owl and I'm a crow, and we just start making bird noises to see where the other one is. Come back, see what we found, and then disperse. So now we're gonna get into some Hericium. They come up a little later than hedgehogs. I found them in end August all the way through October. They have the texture also of lobster meat, not that fishy flavor, but that kind of butteriness. This is one that I use medicinally. It's packed with medicinal properties, but it also is a great meal. The best way that I have found that I like it is to cook it and then to make it into crab cakes. Old Bay seasoning on anything, but this especially, just sub the crab, or even if you mix some of it in with it, you'd be pretty surprised that the texture is really, really similar. There's a couple different species of Hericium. They can get pretty big as well. And if you don't have anything with you to show size comparison, just toss your head in the photo. But they do, so they have teeth as well, but the teeth are growing all from these small little spines. So they branch out and then teeth grow off all the branches. The 2 species that grow around here more prolifically than lion's mane are Hericium americanum and coralloides. One is more branched out, more spindly spiny than the other. Now they're just like this gorgeous little waterfall. I have cultivated them and then taken their spores, like put a plate underneath, collected their spores, and then gone out in the woods and put those back out into the woods. So it's all an experiment, right? Why not? Give it a shot. So this one, you know, how bad do you want that mushroom? Do you have a bag to put them in? You use your t-shirt. This mushroom was growing inside of a log, and I thought I had these lined up. Okay, here we go. It was growing in that crack, and we saw it because there was some on the outside, and then looked on the inside of it, and I was like, this is the mother lode. So went home, thankfully it was just behind the house, grabbed a crowbar and got it out.
So when you pried it out, you used the log then.
Yep. And then the next year I went back to that same log and there was more growing on it. So I was kind of like, I'm just serving it, but they still came back. There was plenty. Yeah, so you can really get tell the difference. So this one, more centrally, they're cascading, and then the next one has just so many more little branches.
That's on the maple.
I found these maple. I've also found them mainly on beach. Like anywhere that I find a beach that has a big scar or a gouge in it, I'll walk up to that tree, look inside of it. Just big ones that are maybe dying or on the ground or standing still. And it's nice. So I have a horse community. I have horses as well, which you've seen earlier. And I should have put her in the gratitude because my horse magic takes me to some pretty sweet spots. And one of our neighbors actually told us about that last log. Doesn't like mushrooms. I know a lot of people that know that I love them, know that I consume them, that are like, I don't know what this is, but you should go check it out. And half the time it's some big cache like that. So this one is actually, make sure here. Oh, I'm glad I didn't say that. So there's actually lion's mane at the end here, and it's more one solid ball or mass that you get the tentacles coming down on. And that one is most packed with medicinal properties, but you can get them from the other ones. There's been studies, it's like all about brain health, brain function. I take a tincture, like old school medicine dropper every day of it. It helps and has been proven to restore the neurological pathways in your brain. So it's a powerhouse in itself. But then I get stuck in, do I want to eat it or do I want to make it into medicine? Just cascading. I have also found these ones road hunting. I was not driving for that one. Here I am, here's the car coming to get me. And this was the first time I ever found actual lion's mane itself. So there's the coralloides, the americanum, and then the arenaceous, which is the lion's mane. All edible, all in the same family, but just a little different, as are me and my brothers.
Are there any lookalikes that are inedible?
I think that a coral mushroom would probably be the closest to that. When you look at, if you looked at the two next to each other, it would be a lot easier to see. Yeah. But without a trained eye and without the time in there, you still want to go make sure you know what you have. I mean, I go out and I have a journal where I'm writing down what time of year it is, what kind of trees I'm around, what it's growing on. And especially too, because if you're in the woods and you might be collecting things and you're walking around, it's like a pinball game when I'm out there, like, ooh, squirrel, squirrel, shiny mushroom. And then you come back, it's nice to have some information so that you can go back to your books and make sure that you know what it is. Do a spore print, which we'll get into here at the end too. I know I'm running over. Everybody's still feeling okay? I'm getting close to the end. I know I have a lot of photos. So here it was the lion's mane before I harvested it. And you can tell too, there's some white dusting kind of around the edges of the top one. Sometimes you don't need to do a spore print at home. You can just do it in the field if the specimen is reached maturity to then reproduce and drop its spores. And the spore print is basically just one next step of ensuring you know what you have, where you're going to take that mushroom, you'll put it without the cap, or in this case, it doesn't have a cap, so you just lay a piece of it down. It doesn't have to be a big chunk on a piece of paper. I like to use a glass plate because you can get a variety of colors anywhere on the rainbow. I mean, you could have a white mushroom with green spores. You could have a white mushroom with yellow, any different color. And some of the lookalikes have the same color spore print. So just proceed with caution. Make sure you know what you got. When in doubt, throw it out. Just another photo of some of the tentacles. So exciting stuff. If you can't tell, mushrooms, I just really like them. This is a really young hen of the woods, Grifola frondosa, or also known as maitake. It has also been used in Japanese and Chinese medicine for thousands of years. It also is a wonderful eating mushroom. They can come in some lighter colors, some darker colors. Their look-alike is called the black staining polypore. It's usually lighter like this, and when you touch it or squeeze it, after a little while, you will stain wherever you touched black. So that's one way in the field you can go through and see if you know what you had. Always a good idea to take something back and get a spore print. These I actually have had the best chance finding them in older cemeteries and along like big trees along old property lines. They love big maples, big oaks. And anytime I am harvesting, I'm trying to be as respectful as possible. Like if it's a private cemetery, private property, like it might be like, oh, but it's right there. You know, you want to make sure that you're respecting other people's spots. So I do a lot of hiking on public access land, and I'm very fortunate to have a lot of people around my hometown that have allowed me to hike around on their property and take hikes. And then you got to figure out, well, do I want to tell them I found something and share it? A lot of times they don't want it, so it's always good to ask. Sharing is caring. So for the maitakes, for medicinal reasons, it's great to aid in your stomach and some spleen issues, but it also has been used to calm your mind and your nervous system. And I can get a little high strung, I will admit. So for different reasons, I use different mushrooms. And a lot of times I'll just take my tinctures and I put a little bit of all of it in there, because I'll take any nutrients Mother Nature and medicine she can give me. So best cache that I've had of hen of the woods. When you pull it apart, it's kind of stringy. So I always think of like pulled pork or pulled chicken when I'm using it. And so I kind of go with more of those routes when I'm thinking of how I want to make it. But it's extremely versatile. It's really great in soups. You can marinate it. But then on my shirt here, I also have the lovely Shaggy Manes. So we're getting now out of summer, into fall, starting to get into winter. I have road hunted these, thankfully. And thankfully, I'm usually just on back roads going really slow and nobody's behind me. But please make sure you're watching if you are road hunting, who's around you. So Shaggy Manes are an inky mushroom. Once they reach their maturity, they do this thing called deliquesce, and they turn into goo. Like it will turn into this black liquid. It's really bizarre. You want to get it before that stage, but it likes really hard packed soil. It also, I found them right, just like I said, right on the edge of the road. It was a place that they had been moving dirt to put in a new section or adjusting a section of a railroad. So it had been just kind of like all packed up there. So these ones are really fun when you do cook them. They have this cap that just surrounds the stem. It's not connected. It's like a bell dangling on it. So if you hold onto the stem, the top of that mushroom is just gonna might even break right off. But there's so many teeny tiny little gills on the inside of that long cap that when you lay it out in the pan, it just kind of breathes and moves, and it's really fun. It's almost like watching the leaves in the canopies of trees. Maybe it's just visual appeal. So they grow on the ground in little clusters or singular. I had to do some crawling to get to some of these ones, but that's half the fun. Their look-alike is a green spored Lepiota. So these mushrooms will turn into a black goo, and the green spored Lepiota will emit green spores, and it will not turn into a goo. But this, I will admit, is my favorite photo. I've been really excited to get to this one to show you all. Mother Nature's neat, isn't it? So here's a little bit, you can tell on the edge of the mushroom here, it's starting to kind of curl up, starting to decompose. And I used a different mushroom to really show that deliquesce. So these are in the same family. It is a very different mushroom. A lot of times I only see these in the morning. Like sometimes you'll see mushrooms on your compost or manure piles, and you only see them in the morning and then they're gone. A lot of them are in that inky family, and it's because they are just disappearing. So the lifespan of this mushroom is basically till the sun hits it, and then it's gone. So we've all enjoyed some of these oyster mushrooms, whether you knew it or not, in that soup that Pat's husband brought. Thank you very much. I can't wait to try it. I hope it was good. I have found oysters in every season with a thaw. The first year that I moved home, it was a little like reconfirming bit for me of, am I going to get into this, into guiding with my passion, turning my passion into my career. I was able to forage and consume mushrooms every month of that year, even in the winter. That being said, one of my winter jobs is at a ski resort, so it wasn't really great for the ski resort that year, but for me, it was wonderful. Oysters do have a really tricky, deadly lookalike. It's called a deadly angel wing. When you find it, you're going to go see the angels. These mushrooms, if you start to notice, all their caps, majority of the time, curl over. An angel wing generally flutes up a little bit, but they're white. They grow on the same stuff. They grow in shelves. They have the same color spore print. They are smaller. Oysters are usually a little bigger and hardier, but somebody could think that they just found smaller oysters. So it's just something to be cautious of. And I will let you know, I have some photos of the angel wings at the end here too. So you can find these ones, this type of oyster mushroom, all year round. And then there's another one that you only see in the fall. And sometimes you only see old ones or you only see little ones. And I chose to just let these ones grow. Some of them were too old, the ones that are kind of up by the face, and then the ones that are down here were just still too young. So just because you see it and you can eat it doesn't mean you have to take it out of the woods. And these ones were very, very much overgrown. They stank. Like oyster mushrooms smell like fish. So when I'm cooking them, I'm not a big fishy flavor person. I like to marinate them. They do great soaked. Some mushrooms that compromises the texture if you soak them in things, but I'm a big stir fry fan just because I've got tons of veggies all the time sliced up. And so I'll just toss some marinade in there, leave them for sometimes up to a week in the fridge, and use them intermittently. They really like hardwoods. They also, I've found them, a majority is like on some logs and twigs over streams or in damp areas. So same thing, you can kind of see those caps are growing and then they're starting to come down. And as you can see, I've got these ones in some water. So the reason I'm doing this is the gills on the underside of the oysters, they're a great home for bugs. Sometimes they're just living and they're not eating. Sometimes they're just living in there and you can kind of pat them off. You can get your brush, you can brush them off. Sometimes I just soak them in salt water and sorry, little buggies, they all come out. So this is a deadly angel wing. It looks pretty similar to those. Grows in similar times of the year, similar habitat. It can mainly grows more on conifers, but it can grow on hardwoods. So if you're looking for something to eat, make sure you know what you don't want to get.
Quincey,
Yes.
is the gill structure the same on both of them?
It's going to have similar gills. Honestly, off the top of my head, I couldn't tell you if the pattern is the same, because sometimes you're going to get gills that are really spread out, really stuck together. You'll get a long, a short, you'll get no rhyme or reason whatsoever. But definitely something you want to look at. But when you do a spore print, these are going to give you the same color. So And these ones are our fall oysters. They're a lot darker. They don't grow as big, but they're still really, really hardy. I love the texture of them. Like, I don't like anything too chewy, but they're they're honestly a little borderline. So in that case, I would just slice them a little thinner. For the fall oysters, I've only found them in October, just in October. They like down hardwood. I found them mainly on maple and oak. And since they are hardy, I have found that you do need to cook them a little bit longer. And they can come in such a variety of colors, as do our next little batch here of turkey tails. So turkey tail is a crazy medicinal mushroom. I can find them any time of year, but that doesn't mean that I would harvest them any time of year. They get their name in Latin as Trametes versicolor, which implies that they come in many colors, and they're getting that variety of colors based on the trace minerals that are in the wood that they're eating. They're always going to be on twigs, sticks, logs. They could be next to other mushrooms. There's actually 3 different types of mushrooms in this photo. There's 2 little gray ones in between the turkey tail and the ones on the right-hand side there. But you can see in the turkey tail here, they're very dark. Some of them still have that really white edge. So those ones are still growing a little bit, but on the underside, they're gonna have small, teeny, tiny little pores. And I always carry a little hand lens with me so that I can double check that. And when you're out there and you're harvesting something, I want it to be in the best condition. So if I see something that's been buggy in, or it's starting to get brown on the underside, I'm not going to harvest that. I'm going to leave those and try and get the ones that are stark white.
And how do you prepare the turkey?
For these, when I use these ones, I'm never eating them. I'm only using them for medicinal reasons. So I'm dehydrating them and then rehydrating them in an alcohol. And then I let that sit for probably 2 months and then strain the alcohol off, keep the mushrooms, and I do a triple extraction method where I will take that same amount of mushrooms. It's called the mark in mushroom terms. And I will make a sort of tea out of it and boil it down and boil it down. And then I will keep the liquid byproduct separate, take those mushrooms again and do a cold soak. And some people do it in different order. And then I will combine all of those liquid byproducts. And then you have to figure out there's some math involved, which always gets me, but it's always fun to get your brain working. Figure out how much water you need to bring to dilute it to something that's shelf stable, but it's not like you're taking a shot of alcohol. And there's also a way to make tinctures with a vegetable glycerin, so that it's like somebody can't have alcohol, recovered alcoholics, or you just don't consume it. Or for children is the most that I read those. So I'll make it in 2 different ways. When I was trying to write down all the medicinal uses of turkey tail, my arm got tired. I use it mainly for immune system boosters, but I've heard of people doing turkey tail tinctures and giving it to their dogs to help with inflammation in their joints. And for humans, I've also heard of it being used in different cancer treatments. And then lastly, but certainly not least, is chaga. It is very well known. It's used medicinally in teas or tinctures. So this black deposit that you see here will only ever grow on a birch tree. That is the chaga itself, and it is attacking the birch. So it's a parasitic tree. Within a decade, it is going to kill that tree. Most commonly, I found them in areas where they had fallen trees, so logging areas or logging roads or on the edge of ski slopes in my hometown. I can tell you all that because you have to come 3 hours. Let me know if you want to come skiing. I'll show you where there's some chaga on the sides of the hills. But it's a different mushroom. It does not produce spores like all the rest of them. So in my opinion, I feel it could be over harvested. So I see it a lot and I appreciate it, but I don't harvest it unless I absolutely need it. I put this in my electric tea kettle or just like in my teapot, and I leave a chunk of it in there for up to a month. And I just put it in there with the water, steep the water and let it cool. And then every time that I'm filling and steeping my water, I'm getting the medicinal properties of the chaga. And anytime that its lookalike is a burl. So like on any other tree, like a maple or a cherry tree, if you're seeing a burl and it's not on a birch, it is not chaga. It's really dark, it's really hard. On the inside, when you break it open, it's really orange in color. But like I said, I leave it in my teapot for a long time because you can really get a lot of the medicinal uses after that first soak. There's still some in there, so try and use the most of it. I personally think that by grinding it and using it single serve in your coffee is a waste, in my opinion, just because I think that you can get more medicinal properties out of it than that one use. So if someone wanted to do that for their coffee, I would suggest getting like a reusable tea bag or a reusable tea steeper and put that in with your coffee and then reuse that every day for, a week, a couple weeks. And then this is kind of where I end, but like, I am not just bringing mushrooms out of the woods. I'm usually bringing garbage out of the woods. So if there's anything that I can implore you to do when you're out in the woods is to just bring an extra bag and pick up garbage to make it a little cleaner. It's my favorite place to be, and it's very disheartening for me to see some of the things that get left out there. But if we can all just do a little part, we're already out there, just pick a couple things up. You're not coming out of the woods empty-handed. And here is the basket that Pat saw me with at the farmer's market that day. These are my ancient bottles I was joking about trying to sell to people. And so here's a photo of a spore print. And this is I just have some photos at the end here of different logs that I've inoculated, just some snapshots of the mushroom farm and of my farmer's market tables. But this is what you will get. So this cap here, I had laid it down on the aluminum foil. Aluminum foil is great because you can pick up any color. If you have a white piece of paper and white spores, you might not be able to see them. So I like glass or aluminum foil, and you just leave it capped down. Sometimes it can take an hour, sometimes it can take overnight. I'll even put I have a very large dog, and he is not a counter carp, thankfully, but he is very big and can knock things over. So I usually put a colander or something on the counter just so that it doesn't get disturbed and knocked around. And then you can also see spore prints if you just accidentally leave mushrooms on your clothes. You can get your own natural spore prints, and that's what you're seeing in that little brown patch there. You can kind of see some of the lines where the gills used to be or were and where they dropped from.
Could be a whole new clothing line.
There are some spore print art going on that's pretty beautiful.
Wow.
And if you want to get even further and get a microscope and look at those spores one step further, or you can do DNA testing and all sorts of different chemical testing to figure out exactly what that mushroom is, because we're still figuring out mushrooms this day. You can buy anything online these days. I wouldn't be able to direct you to a one that I use, but I would happily look something up for you if you're interested.
You use a certain brand?
I don't. I actually don't go too much further than spore print. Like when in doubt, I throw it out. I live in a very small space with one counter, actually. So the amount of drop zones that I have is minimal, and it has to be that way. So I can't leave too much stuff on the counters there. So this is just a quick logo and some few shots. So I started a mushroom farm. We've cultivated shiitakes. I have 5 different strains of shiitakes and 3 different strains of oyster mushrooms. And we did them in 2 different ways. So in your log inoculation, where you're plugging the logs, and these are just stacking and resting, and just one batch that we have. They're now in some trees and stood up and producing. But then I also have made smaller ones of these, so I can take them to farmers markets, and you can take your own little mushroom log home, have your own little buddy. But I also have used this method, which is the Totem Method. And it's where you're just cutting off rounds of different wood's better for different mushrooms. And then you just stack them however many layers you want. And the substrate is in between and all around it. These ones were a little more labor intensive than just plugging them and setting them outside. These ones you had to wrap them up in a bag, leave them inside for 6 months, take them outside. But the way that they grow up out of the slice in that middle is just really, really pleasing. So here's just a few photos of some mushrooms that we've grown and harvested. So we have some of the blue dolphin oysters in the middle, and then to the right in the middle there, some of the fall oysters, or pohu is their species name, and then a variety of different shiitakes. And kind of like, you know, when you're gardening and your labels wear off, some of my labels wore off. So I know that there's 4 different kinds of shiitakes there, but exactly which ones, I'll know better next year. And just a few photos to end up of the market stand. So the idea with the mushroom farm is for me to be able to spend a little less time feeling like I am raping Mother Nature, because when I was doing too many markets for too long, it was putting a little extra tax on me, feeling like I was in the woods looking for dollar signs. And I want to just be happy with what I found. I want to share what I have found and be able to consume some myself. And I just found out that there's a little much to say that I was only going to provide things that I foraged, and then come into the time that you have to do it. And this is my main job, but I am a Jill of all trades, and I wear many hats and extend myself probably more than I should. But so the way for me to be able to do that is to have the mushroom farm, have that be the constant supply, and then these be like that little pop, little bang, pizzazz specials. But these are all from the last 2 years. It's been a pretty good market year. And we're just starting up again this year. So you can kind of see I do some tinctures and some dried chaga. We've got chicken in the woods and hedgehogs in there. And this is, you know, there's always things to be done with mushrooms. So I hope that if anything, you guys are able to see mushrooms a little more often with a little better understanding for them and just more interest. And this is me just walking off into my happy place. So that is what I have prepared for you guys. Thanks for joining me on just a little trip through the season.